Lisa stood in front of the tall mirror in the church's bridal room, her hands shaking slightly as she adjusted the delicate pearl necklace around her neck. Today was supposed to be the most perfect day of her life. She had dreamed about this. Moments since she was a little girl, and now, at 28, everything was finally falling into place. The white silk dress hugged her figure perfectly, with tiny crystals sewn into the bodice that caught the light every time she moved. Her veil, passed down from her adoptive grandmother, cascaded down her back like a waterfall of white lace. Outside the small bridal room, she could hear the gentle murmur of guests filling the chapel, their excited voices mixing with the soft sounds of violins warming up. "This is it," she whispered to herself, taking a deep breath. "This is really happening." Lisa had spent the last 18 months planning every single detail of this wedding. She had visited 12 different venues before finding the perfect chapel with its beautiful stained glass windows and wooden pews that seemed to glow in the afternoon sunlight. She had tasted cakes from 8 different bakeries, interviewed 4 photographers, and even had 3 dress fittings to make sure everything was absolutely perfect. Her fiancé, Michael, had often teased her about how particular she was being, about every little detail. "It's just one day," he would say with a loving smile. "As long as we end up married, that's all that matters to me." But Lisa couldn't help herself. She had grown up watching romantic movies and reading fairy tale stories, and she wanted her wedding to be just as magical as the ones she had seen on screen. Every flower had to be in the right place, every candle had to be lit at exactly the right moment, and every piece of music had to be performed flawlessly. The chapel looked absolutely stunning. White roses and baby's breath decorated the ends of each pew, and soft candlelight flickered from every windowsill. The altar was draped in white silk, and a beautiful archway of flowers stood where she and Michael would exchange their vows. Her wedding coordinator, Janet, had worked tirelessly to make sure every detail was exactly as Lisa had envisioned. Lisa picked up her bouquet of white roses and took one last look in the mirror. Her makeup was perfect, her hair was styled in an elegant updo, and her dress looked like something from a fairy tale. She had never felt more beautiful in her entire life. "Okay," she said to herself, "it's time for the final walkthrough." She stepped out of the bridal room and made her way toward the main chapel. The guests were still arriving, and she could see Michael's family taking their seats on the right side of the aisle. Her own family, including her adoptive parents who had raised her with so much love, were chatting quietly on the left side. As she walked toward the altar, Lisa mentally checked off each item on her list. The flowers were perfect, the candles were lit, the photographer was in position, and the string quartet was setting up their instruments near the front of the church. Everything was going exactly according to plan, but as she approached the piano, which sat elegantly to the side of the altar, Lisa felt her heart skip a beat. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The pianist she had hired, a well-known professional, who had performed at some of the most exclusive weddings in the city, was nowhere to be seen. Instead, sitting at the beautiful black piano, was a woman Lisa had never seen before. The woman appeared to be in her mid-40s, with shoulder-length gray hair that looked like it hadn't been styled in a salon for quite some time. She wore a simple black dress that looked worn and slightly faded, and her hands, which were gently touching the piano keys, showed signs of years of hard work. Her shoes were practical black flats that had definitely seen better days. Lisa felt a knot forming in her stomach. This was not what she had planned. This was not what she had paid for. This was definitely not what she had envisioned for her perfect wedding day. The woman seemed to sense that someone was watching her and looked up from the piano. Her eyes were kind but tired, with small lines around them that spoke of both laughter and hardship. When she saw Lisa approaching in her wedding dress, a gentle smile crossed her face. "You must be the bride?" the woman said, her voice warm and friendly. "You look absolutely beautiful." Lisa forced a smile, but inside she was panicking. "Thank you," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm sorry, but I think there might be some confusion. I hired a specific pianist for today, and I'm not sure who you are." The woman's smile faltered slightly, but she maintained her composure. "I'm Margaret," she said, standing up from the piano bench. "I work with Harmony Music Services. Your regular pianist, Robert, had a family emergency this morning. His father was rushed to the hospital and he couldn't make it to your wedding. The agency sent me as a replacement." Lisa felt the world spinning around her. A replacement? Today? On her wedding day? This was exactly the kind of thing she had tried so hard to avoid by planning everything so carefully. "I don't understand," Lisa said, her voice becoming sharper with stress. "I specifically requested Robert because of his experience with high-end weddings. I needed someone who would fit the elegant atmosphere we've created here." Margaret nodded understandingly. "I completely understand your concern. I know this is your special day and you want everything to be perfect. I've been playing piano for over 30 years and I've performed at many weddings. I promise you, I won't let you down." But Lisa was already shaking her head. She looked at Margaret's simple appearance, her warm dress, her practical shoes, and felt a wave of disappointment wash over her. This woman looked nothing like the polished professional she had expected. She looked more like someone who might play piano at a small community center, not at the elegant wedding Lisa had spent so much time and money planning. "I'm sure you're very talented," Lisa said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But this is my wedding day. I need someone who looks more appropriate for such an elegant affair." The words hung in the air between them, and Lisa immediately saw the impact they had on Margaret. The older woman's kind eyes seemed to dim slightly, and her shoulders sagged just a little, but she maintained her dignity. Nodding slowly as if she had heard similar words before, Lisa's wedding coordinator, Janet, had been watching the exchange from across the room and quickly hurried over. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "We have a problem," Lisa said, her stress level rising by the minute. "This isn't the pianist I hired. I can't have someone who doesn't fit the image of my wedding playing during the ceremony." Janet looked uncomfortable, glancing between Lisa and Margaret. "I understand your concerns, but it's less than an hour before the ceremony begins. Finding another pianist at this short notice would be nearly impossible." "Then we'll use recorded music," Lisa said firmly. "I'd rather have no live music than have someone who doesn't match the elegance of this event." Margaret began gathering her sheet. Music from the piano, her movements slow and deliberate. Lisa could see that her hands were shaking slightly, though whether from nerves or hurt, she couldn't tell. "I'm sorry this didn't work out," Margaret said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I hope your wedding day is everything you dreamed it would be." As Margaret prepared to leave, she paused and looked directly at Lisa. There was something in her expression that Lisa couldn't quite identify, a deep sadness, mixed with what looked almost like recognition. "You know," Margaret said softly, "you remind me of someone very special. Someone I lost a long time ago." But Lisa was already turned away, focused on instructing Janet about setting up the sound system for recorded music. She barely heard Margaret's words, too consumed with trying to salvage what she saw as a disaster threatening her perfect day. Margaret left the chapel quietly, her worn black shoes making soft sounds on the marble floor as she walked away from what might have been the most important performance of her life. Lisa watched as Margaret slowly packed her sheet music into a worn leather bag that looked like it had been with her for decades. The sight of the older woman's careful movements made something twist uncomfortably in Lisa's chest, but she pushed the feeling away. This was her wedding day, and she couldn't let emotions cloud her judgment about what was best for her special moment. "I'm truly sorry about this," Lisa said, though her voice carried more frustration than genuine sympathy. "I'm sure you understand that this is the most important day of my life. Everything needs to be absolutely perfect." Margaret nodded slowly, her fingers pausing on the zipper of her music bag. "Of course, dear, I completely understand. Every bride deserves to have her dream wedding exactly as she imagines it." There was no bitterness in Margaret's voice, which somehow made Lisa feel worse. She had expected the woman to argue or become defensive, but instead, Margaret was responding with a grace that Lisa found unsettling. It would have been easier if Margaret had gotten angry or made a scene. That would have justified Lisa's decision. To dismiss her. Janet, the wedding coordinator, stood nearby wringing her hands. She had been in the wedding business for over 15 years and had seen many last-minute changes, but she could sense the tension in this situation was different. Lisa, I really think we should consider our options carefully. Margaret Combs. Highly recommended by the agency, and her references are excellent. I don't care about references, Lisa snapped, her stress making her voice sharper than she intended. Look at her. Look at this dress, these shoes. Does she look like someone who belongs at a wedding that cost $40,000? The number hung in the air like a challenge. Lisa immediately regretted mentioning the cost of her wedding, but she was beyond caring about politeness now. She had worked 2 jobs for 3 years to save up for this wedding, and she wasn't going to let anything ruin it. Margaret's cheeks flushed slightly, and she looked down at her simple black dress. Lisa noticed that the woman's hands had stopped shaking, but now they were clenched tightly around the handle of her music bag. You're right, Margaret said quietly. I'm not dressed for a $40,000 wedding. I'm dressed for a job that pays me $75 for 3 hours of work. But I want you to know that I would have played your wedding music with the same care and attention as if it were being performed at Carnegie Hall. Lisa felt a pang of guilt at Margaret's words, but she was too deep into her decision to back down now. I'm sure you would have tried your best, but this isn't about effort. It's about presentation and professionalism. Presentation, Margaret repeated slowly, as if she was tasting the word. Yes, I suppose I don't present very well, do I? She looked around the beautiful chapel, taking in the elegant flower arrangements, the expensive candles, and the perfectly dressed guests who were beginning to fill the pews. Her eyes lingered on Lisa's stunning white dress, the professional photographer setting up his equipment, and the string quartet members in their formal black attire. I've been playing piano since I was 7 years old, Margaret continued, her voice growing stronger. I've performed at over 300 weddings, and I've never had a single complaint about my music. But I suppose that doesn't matter if I don't look the part. Lisa felt defensive now. This isn't personal, it's just business. I hired a specific type of performer, and you're not what I ordered. What you ordered, Margaret repeated, and now there was a slight edge to her voice. I see. Well, I suppose I am just a product to be returned if I don't meet your specifications. The chapel had grown quieter as guests took their seats, and Lisa realized that several people were starting to notice the conversation happening near the piano. She could see her future mother-in-law glancing over with a concerned expression, and her own adoptive mother was starting to stand up from her seat. Please, Lisa said, lowering her voice, I don't want to make a scene. I just need you to understand that this isn't going to work out. Margaret closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, they were shining with unshed tears. You know what the saddest part is? She said, her voice barely above a whisper. When I first saw you walking down that aisle in your beautiful dress, for just a moment, I thought I was looking at my own daughter. Lisa felt her heart skip a beat. What? My daughter would be about your age now, Margaret continued, seemingly talking more to herself than to Lisa. I gave her up for adoption when she was just a baby. I was only 17, and I had no money, no family support, no way to take care of her. But I've thought about her every single day for the last 28 years. The number 28 hit Lisa like a physical blow. She was 28 years old. She had been adopted as a baby. The coincidence was too strange to ignore, but surely it was just that, a coincidence. I've imagined what her wedding day might look like, Margaret went on, her voice growing softer. I've pictured her in a beautiful white dress, surrounded by people who love her, starting a new life with someone who makes her happy. And when I saw you today, just for a moment, I let myself pretend that maybe, just maybe, I had been given the chance to be part of my daughter's special day. Lisa's mouth went dry. She wanted to ask more questions, but she was afraid of what the answers might be. Instead, she stood frozen, watching as Margaret shouldered her music bag and prepared to leave. I'm sorry I disappointed you, Margaret said, her dignity intact despite the tears that were now rolling down her cheeks. I hope your wedding is everything you dreamed it would be. Janet stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable with the entire situation. "Margaret, let me walk you out." "I'm so sorry this didn't work out," but Margaret shook her head. "I can find my own way out, thank you." She turned to leave, but then paused and looked back at Lisa one more time. "You know," she said, "beauty isn't just about how things look on the outside. Sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most broken places." With that, Margaret walked slowly toward the chapel doors, her worn black shoes making soft sounds on the marble floor. Lisa watched her go, feeling like she had just made a terrible mistake, but unable to understand why. As Margaret reached the doors, she turned back one final time. The distance between them made it impossible for Lisa to see her expression clearly, but something about the way the older woman stood there, silhouetted against the afternoon light, made Lisa's heart ache. Then Margaret was gone and Lisa was left standing beside the silent piano, wondering why her perfect wedding day suddenly felt so empty. Janet approached her carefully. "Are you all right? You look pale." Lisa shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. "I'm fine. Let's just get the sound system set up for the recorded music. The ceremony needs to start in 30 minutes. But as Janet hurried away to make the arrangements, Lisa found herself staring at the piano bench where Margaret had been sitting just moments before. On the floor beside the bench was a single piece of sheet music that Margaret had apparently dropped in her hurry to leave. Lisa picked it up and saw that it was a handwritten arrangement of Amazing Grace with detailed notes in the margins about tempo and emotion. At the top of the page, in neat handwriting, were the words, "For my daughter, wherever you are. May you find the grace I couldn't give you." Lisa's hands trembled as she held the paper, and for the first time all day she wondered if her pursuit of perfection had just cost her something far more valuable than a flawless wedding ceremony. Lisa folded the handwritten sheet music carefully and slipped it into her bouquet, trying to push away the strange feeling that had settled in her chest. The chapel was now completely filled with guests, and she could see Michael at the altar, looking handsome in his navy blue suit. Checking his watch with a nervous smile, the sound system had been quickly set up, and Janet was testing the recorded music that would replace the live piano performance. The recorded version of Canon in D filled the chapel, but something felt off about it. The music was technically perfect, but it lacked the warmth and soul that only comes from live performance. "Places, everyone," Janet called out softly. "We're ready to begin." Lisa took her position at the back of the chapel, her arm linked with her adoptive father, Robert, who had walked her down every important path in her life. He was a kind man who had worked 2 jobs to provide for his family, and he looked proud and emotional as he prepared to give his daughter away. "You look absolutely beautiful, sweetheart," he whispered, squeezing her arm gently. "Your mother and I are so proud of you." Lisa smiled and tried to focus on the moment, but her mind kept drifting back to Margaret and the strange conversation they had shared. The woman's words echoed in her head. "My daughter would be about your age now. I gave her up for adoption when she was just a baby." The processional music began, and Lisa's bridesmaids started their walk down the aisle. Her best friend Kelly, her college roommate Amanda, and her cousin Jessica all looked stunning in their soft pink dresses. The guests stood and turned to watch, their faces filled with joy and anticipation. Then it was Lisa's turn. As she began walking down the aisle with her father, she tried to focus on Michael's face, on the beautiful decorations, on the moment she had been planning for so long. But something felt wrong. The recorded music seemed hollow, echoing strangely in the large chapel. It felt like something was missing, like the heart had been taken out of the ceremony. About halfway down the aisle, Lisa noticed that several guests were whispering to each other, and she caught fragments of their conversations. Wasn't there supposed to be a pianist? She heard Mrs. Patterson, her former neighbor, ask her husband, "The music sounds a bit flat, doesn't it?" Commented one of Michael's work colleagues. Lisa's cheeks burned with embarrassment. Even the guests could tell that something was off with the music. She had worked so hard to make everything perfect, and now people were noticing that her ceremony was lacking something essential. When she finally reached the altar, Michael took her hands and smiled warmly. You look incredible, he whispered. Are you ready for this? Lisa nodded, but she felt distracted throughout the entire ceremony. The minister spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through good times and bad, but Lisa found herself thinking about Margaret's worn black dress and the sadness in her eyes. The recorded music played at all the right moments. During the lighting of the unity candle, during the exchange of rings, during the kiss that sealed their marriage. But each time, Lisa felt like she was listening to an echo of what should have been there, a shadow of the live music that would have made these moments truly special. When the ceremony ended and they were walking back down the aisle as husband and wife, Lisa caught sight of her adoptive mother, Helen, in the front pew. Helen was crying happy tears, but there was something else in her expression, a look of concern that made Lisa's stomach knot up. The reception was held in the church's fellowship hall, which had been transformed into an elegant dining room, with white tablecloths, centerpieces of white roses, and twinkling lights strung from the ceiling. The photographer was busy capturing every moment. The caterers were serving the carefully planned menu, and the guests were mingling and congratulating the happy couple, but Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that something important was missing. From her perfect day, about an hour into the reception, while Michael was chatting with his college friends and Lisa was accepting congratulations from relatives, Helen approached her daughter with a serious expression. Lisa, dear, I need to speak with you privately, Helen said, her voice quiet but urgent. They stepped into a small side room that was being used to store wedding gifts. Helen closed the door and turned to face her daughter, her hands twisted together nervously. What's wrong, Mom? Lisa asked, though she had a sinking feeling that she already knew the conversation was going to be about Margaret. Janet told me what happened with the pianist, Helen began carefully. She said the woman asked some unusual questions about you. Lisa's heart started beating faster. What kind of questions? She wanted to know your full name, your exact birth date, and ... Helen paused, looking uncomfortable. She asked if you had been adopted. The words hit Lisa like a punch to the stomach. She sat down heavily in one of the folding chairs that had been set up for the gift opening later. There's more, Helen continued, her voice growing softer. Janet said the woman mentioned something about having a daughter she gave up for adoption. A daughter who would be 28 years old now. Lisa's mouth went dry. She pulled the folded sheet music from her bouquet where she had hidden it and showed it to her mother. She dropped this, she said quietly. Look at what's written at the top. Helen read the handwritten note and gasped. Oh my goodness. Lisa, do you think ... I don't know, Lisa said, but her voice was shaking. The timing would be right. I'm 28. I was adopted as a baby, and she said her daughter would be about my age. Helen sat down beside her daughter and took her hand. You know, we've always been honest with you about your adoption. We told you that your birth mother was a teenager who couldn't take care of a baby, and that she made the difficult decision to place you with a family who could provide for you. But you never told me much about her, Lisa said. You always said you didn't have much information. We didn't, Helen replied. The adoption was arranged through a private agency, and they kept the details confidential. We knew she was young, that she was musical, and that she wanted her baby to have opportunities she couldn't provide. But we never knew her name or what happened to her after. Lisa felt tears starting to form in her eyes. She was musical? Yes, the social worker mentioned that she played piano and had hoped to study music before she became pregnant. The pieces were falling into place in Lisa's mind, and she felt sick with the realization of what might have happened. Mom, what if I just turned away my own birth mother from my wedding? What if she came here hoping to see me, and I dismissed her because she didn't look fancy enough? Helen wrapped her arms around her daughter. Oh, sweetheart. We don't know for sure that it was her. It could be a coincidence. But what if it wasn't? Lisa asked, her voice breaking. What if she's been looking for me all these years, and when she finally found me, I rejected her because of how she looked? The irony of the situation was devastating. Lisa had always wondered about her birth mother, had imagined meeting her, Someday had dreamed of thanking her for the difficult decision she had made. And now, on what should have been the happiest day of her life, she realized she might have just destroyed the most important reunion of her lifetime. "We have to find her," Lisa said suddenly, standing up and pacing the small room. "We have to find out if it was really her?" Helen nodded. "I'll call Janet and get the contact information for the music agency. If this woman is your birth mother, we need to reach out to her immediately." As her mother left to make the call, Lisa sat alone in the quiet room, surrounded by wedding gifts and the remnants of her perfect day. She thought about Margaret's kind eyes, her gentle voice, and the way she had maintained her dignity even when being dismissed. She thought about the handwritten music and the note about a daughter she had never stopped loving. For the first time in her life, Lisa realized that some things were more important than perfect appearances, and she prayed that it wasn't too late to fix the terrible mistake she might have made. Lisa paced back and forth in the small room, her elegant white dress rustling with each anxious step. Her perfect wedding reception was continuing just outside the door, but she felt like she was living in a completely different world now. The laughter and music from the celebration seemed to come from far away, as if she was underwater and everyone else was on the surface. Helen returned within minutes, her face pale but determined. "I got the information," she said, holding up a piece of paper with Margaret's contact details. "The agency gave me her phone number and address. She lives about 20 minutes away in an apartment complex on Maple Street." Lisa's hands were shaking as she took the paper. "What do I do now? What if it's not her? What if I'm completely wrong about this? And what if you're right?" Helen asked gently. "What if you don't try to find out, and you spend the rest of your life wondering?" Before Lisa could respond, there was a soft knock on the door. Michael peered in, his face showing concern. "Hey, is everything okay?" "People are starting to ask where the bride went." Lisa looked at her new husband, this man who had promised to love her through good times and bad, and realized she had to tell him the truth. "Michael, I think I made a terrible mistake today. I think the pianist I dismissed might have been my birth mother." Michael's eyes widened. "What? Are you serious?" Helen quickly explained what they had discovered, and Michael listened carefully, his expression growing more concerned with each detail. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "We have to go find her," he said finally. "Right now. But what about the reception?" Lisa asked. "All these people came to celebrate with us." "Lisa," Michael said, taking her hands in his, "if there's even a chance that this woman is your birth mother, then finding her is more important than any party. Our families will understand." Lisa felt a rush of love for her husband. This was exactly why she had married him, because he understood what truly mattered in life. They quickly found Robert, Lisa's adoptive father, and explained the situation. His face went through a range of emotions as he processed the news. "We always wondered if this day might come," he said quietly. "We always hoped that if you ever found your birth mother, it would be a happy reunion. Will you cover for us?" Lisa asked. "Can you tell the guests that we had to step out for a family emergency?" Robert nodded. "Of course, go, and Lisa, no matter what happens, remember that you have a family who loves you." The drive to Margaret's apartment complex felt like it took forever, even though it was only 20 minutes away. Lisa had changed out of her wedding dress and into a simple blue dress, but she still felt overdressed and out of place. Michael drove while Helen sat in the passenger seat, and Lisa stared out the window at the passing neighborhoods. The apartment complex was older and modest, with small units that looked like they had been built in the 1980s. The parking lot was cracked in several places, and the building needed a fresh coat of paint. It was a far cry from the elegant neighborhood where Lisa had grown up with her adoptive family. "Are you sure about this?" Michael asked as they parked in front of Building C. "We can still turn around and go back to the reception." "No," Lisa said firmly. "I need to know the truth." They climbed the narrow stairs to the second floor, and Lisa felt her heart pounding as they stood in front of apartment 2B. The hallway smelled like old carpet and cleaning supplies, and she could hear The faint sound of a television playing in one of the nearby units. Helen knocked gently on the door. "Margaret, it's Helen Thompson. I was at the wedding today with my daughter." There was a long pause, and then they heard footsteps approaching the door. When it opened, Margaret stood there in the same black dress she had worn to the wedding, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "I'm sorry to bother you," Helen said softly, "but we need to talk to you. May we come in?" Margaret looked confused but stepped aside to let them enter. Her apartment was small but clean, with a tiny kitchen, a living room barely big enough for a couch and coffee table, and what looked like a bedroom off to the side. But what caught Lisa's attention immediately was the piano. It was an old upright piano that took up nearly a quarter of the living room. The wood was scratched and worn, and several of the keys were yellowed with age, but it was obviously well-loved and well-maintained. Sheet music was stacked neatly on top, and a small lamp provided light for reading the notes. "Please sit down," Margaret said, gesturing to the couch. "I have to admit, I'm surprised to see you here." Lisa sat down between Michael and Helen, her eyes taking in the details of Margaret's small home. There were books about music theory on the shelves, a few framed photos of what looked like students at piano recitals, and a small collection of classical music CDs. "Margaret," Helen began carefully, "we need to ask you something important. Today, when you were at the wedding, you mentioned having a daughter you gave up for adoption." Margaret's face went pale as she sat down heavily in the only chair in the room. "Yes," she said quietly, "I did mention that. Can you tell us more about her?" Lisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she looked up, her eyes were filled with tears. "Again, I was 17 years old," she said. "Just a kid myself, really. I was studying music at the community college, hoping to become a piano teacher someday. But then I got pregnant and everything changed." She paused, wiping her eyes with a tissue. "The baby's father was a boy from my high school. When I told him I was pregnant, he said it wasn't his problem and that he was going to college and couldn't be bothered with a baby. My own parents, they kicked me out of the house. Said I have brought shame on the family." Lisa felt her heart breaking as she listened to Margaret's story. She had always known that her birth mother must have been in a difficult situation, but hearing the details made it real in a way that was almost overwhelming. "I lived in a home for unwed mothers for the last few months of my pregnancy," Margaret continued. "The social workers there helped me understand that I had two choices: try to raise the baby on my own with no money, no family support, and no way to finish my education, or place her with a family who could give her all the things I couldn't." "Her?" Lisa asked, her voice catching. Margaret nodded. "I had a little girl, born on March 15th, 1997, at 3:47 in the morning. She weighed 6 pounds, 2 ounces, and she had the most beautiful dark hair I'd ever seen." Lisa's hand flew to her mouth. March 15th, 1997 was her birthday. She had been born at 3:47 a.m., and her adoptive parents had always told her she'd been born with a full head of dark hair. "What did you name her?" Helen asked gently. "Amy," Margaret said, smiling through her tears. "I named her Amy Rose after my grandmother. I only got to hold her a few minutes before they took her away, but I've thought about her every single day since then." Lisa felt the room spinning around her. Amy Rose, her original name had been Amy Rose. "I always wondered if I'd done the right thing," Margaret continued. "I wondered if she was happy, if she knew she was loved, if she ever thought about me. The adoption was closed, so I never knew what happened to her or who adopted her." "But you tried to find her?" Michael asked. Margaret nodded. "When she turned 18, I started looking. I hired a private investigator a few years ago, and he was able to find some information. He discovered that she had been adopted by a family named Thompson and that she had grown up in this city. But he couldn't find her current address or married name." She looked directly at Lisa. "A few weeks ago, I saw a wedding announcement in the newspaper. Thompson-Wilson wedding. And when I saw the photo, She trailed off, shaking her head. "What did you see?" Lisa asked, though she already knew the answer. "I saw a beautiful young Woman who looked exactly like I did at that age. Same dark hair, same eyes, same smile. I knew it was impossible, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. When the music agency called about a last-minute wedding job for a Thompson-Wilson wedding, I volunteered immediately. The room fell silent as the truth settled over all of them. Lisa looked at Margaret, her birth mother, and felt 28. Years of questions finally being answered. I never stopped loving you, Margaret said quietly. And I never stopped hoping that someday I'd get to tell you that. The silence in Margaret's small living room felt heavy with 28 years of separation and longing. Lisa stared at the woman sitting across from her, trying to process the fact that this was the person who had given her life, who had made the most difficult decision a mother could make, and who had spent nearly 3 decades wondering if she had done the right thing. I can't believe this is really happening, Lisa whispered, tears streaming down her face. I've thought about you so many times. I've wondered who you were, what you looked like, whether you ever thought about me. Margaret's face crumpled with emotion. Every single day, she said, her voice breaking. Every birthday, every Christmas, every time I saw a little girl with dark hair. I wondered if you were happy, if you knew how much I loved you, if you understood why I had to let you go. Michael reached over and took Lisa's hand, squeezing it gently. He looked at Margaret with compassion. You made an incredible sacrifice, he said. You gave her a chance at a life you couldn't provide at 17. But the way I treated you today, Lisa said, her guilt overwhelming her, I was so horrible to you. I judged you based on how you looked, dismissed you like you were nothing. And the whole time you were my mother. Margaret wiped her eyes and shook her head. You weren't horrible, sweetheart. You were protecting something precious to you. You wanted your wedding day to be perfect, and I didn't fit into that picture. I understand that. No, Lisa said firmly. There's no excuse for how I behaved. I was shallow and cruel, and I'm so ashamed of myself. Helen, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. Lisa, you're human. You made a mistake based on appearances, but what matters now is how you move forward from here. Lisa looked around Margaret's modest apartment, really seeing it for the first time. Despite its small size and worn furniture, it was filled with warmth. The walls were covered with photos of piano students at recitals, their faces beaming with pride. There were thank you cards from families pinned to a bulletin board and stacks of sheet music organized neatly on shelves. Tell me about your life, Lisa said. Tell me everything. I want to know who you are. Margaret smiled through her tears. Well, I did eventually become a piano teacher, just like I dreamed. It took me longer than planned because I had to work full-time jobs to support myself, but I finished my music degree when I was 25. I've been teaching private lessons for over 20 years now, she pointed to the photos on the wall. Those are some of my students. I've taught hundreds of children over the years. Some of them have gone on to study music in college. Others just learned to love music as a hobby. But each one of them has been special to me. Lisa studied the photos, seeing children of all ages sitting at pianos, their faces concentrated or joyful, depending on whether they were practicing or performing. It must be rewarding work. It is, Margaret said. But I'll be honest, it's also been lonely. I never married, never had other children. I poured all my love into my students and my music, but there was always this empty space in my heart. Where you should have been, Michael leaned forward. Margaret, can I ask you something? How did you know to look for Lisa's wedding announcement? Margaret's cheeks flushed slightly. This might sound silly, but I've been checking the wedding announcements in the newspaper for years. I knew that if my daughter got married in this city, there was a chance I might see her name. When I saw Lisa Thompson marrying Michael Wilson and saw her photo, my heart just stopped. She looked so much like I did at her age. And you volunteered to play at the wedding hoping it might be me? Lisa asked. I told myself I was being ridiculous, Margaret admitted. The chances were so small, but I couldn't help hoping. When I walked into that chapel today and saw you in your wedding dress, I knew immediately you have the same eyes, the same smile. You even hold your head the same way I do when I'm concentrating. Lisa touched her face self-consciously. I always wondered where I got certain habits from. My parents used to say I had mannerisms that didn't come from either of them. You bite your lower lip when you're thinking hard, Margaret said with a small smile. I do the same thing. And you gesture with your hands when you talk, just like I do. Lisa laughed despite her tears. Helen always said I was more animated than anyone else in the family. They spent the next hour sharing stories and filling in the gaps of 28 years. Margaret told Lisa about her struggles as a young single woman, about working multiple jobs while going to school, about building her music teaching business from nothing. She shared photos from her own childhood, and Lisa was amazed to see how much they looked alike. Lisa told Margaret about her childhood, about Robert and Helen's love and support, about her education and her career in marketing. She talked about meeting Michael, about their courtship, and about the wedding they had just left behind. I should call the reception, Lisa said suddenly. People will be wondering where we are. Actually, Michael said, checking his phone, I've been getting texts from your dad. He told everyone that we had a family emergency and might not be back tonight. He said people understood and that the party is still going strong. He's a good man, Margaret said. From everything you've told me, both of your parents sound wonderful. I'm so grateful they gave you the love and opportunities I couldn't provide. They are wonderful, Lisa agreed. But they always told me that if I ever found you, I should thank you for giving me life and for making such a difficult choice out of love. Margaret broke down crying again. I was so afraid you would hate me for giving you away. Never, Lisa said firmly. Margaret, you were 17 years old with no support system. You chose to carry me to term and place me with a family. Who could care for me? That took incredible courage and love. As the evening wore on, they discovered they had more in common than just appearance. Both loved classical music, both were perfectionists in their own ways, and both had a tendency to worry about making everyone around them happy. There's something I want to give you, Margaret said, standing up and going to the piano. She opened the bench and pulled out a small wooden box. I've been saving this for 28 years, hoping someday I'd have the chance to give it to you. She handed the box to Lisa, who opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a small silver locket on a delicate chain. When Lisa opened the locket, she found a tiny photo of herself as a newborn baby on one side, and a photo of Margaret at 17 on the other. This was taken the day you were born, Margaret said softly. Before they took you to your new family. I wanted you to have something that showed you were loved from the very beginning. Lisa put the locket on immediately, feeling like a missing piece of herself had finally been returned. What happens now? Michael asked. How do we move forward from here? Margaret looked uncertain. I don't want to intrude on your life, Lisa. You have a family, a husband, a whole life that I'm not part of. I'm just grateful I got to meet you and know that you're happy and loved. Are you kidding? Lisa said. I just found my birth mother on my wedding day. You're not going anywhere. We have 28 years to catch up on. 6 months later, Lisa and Michael hosted a small anniversary party to celebrate their first 6 months of marriage. The gathering was held in their backyard, with tables set up under string lights and a buffet of homemade food, prepared by family and friends, but the highlight of the evening was the music. Margaret sat at the piano they had bought for their living room, playing a beautiful arrangement of Amazing Grace, the same song that had been written on the sheet music she had dropped at the wedding dot. As Margaret played, Lisa stood beside the piano with Michael's arm around her waist, watching the woman who had given her life fill their home with beautiful music. Helen and Robert sat nearby, beaming with joy at seeing their daughter so happy and complete. You know, Lisa said to Michael as they listened to the music, I spent so much time trying to make that wedding day perfect. But it turns out the most perfect thing about it was the mistake I almost made. What do you mean? Michael asked. I almost let the most important person in my life walk away because I was too focused on appearances to see what really mattered, Lisa said. I learned that real beauty isn't about how things look on the outside. It's about love and forgiveness and second chances. Margaret finished the song and looked up at Lisa with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" Lisa asked. "For giving me the chance to be part of your family, for forgiving me for all the years I wasn't here, and for teaching me that sometimes the most beautiful music really does come from the most broken places." Lisa hugged her birth mother tightly, knowing that her life was now more complete than any perfect wedding day could have ever made it. She had learned that family isn't just about blood or appearances, it's about love, acceptance, and the courage to open your heart to unexpected possibilities.